Just in case, I've had Zoom meetings.
Yeah.
And he starts to climb on me a little bit, so I'll just shut the door. Hopefully, I won't hear anything. But he's got, I've got a Kong with peanut butter in, and I've got also that real like bone for him to chew on. So he should be busy. And if he whines, hopefully we won't hear it. I don't think he will. We're far enough away.
Yeah, no, it should be fine. No worries. I started the recording now, and I'll just trim it when you actually begin it later, just so I don't forget. And I planned this really poorly, but my oven timer is going to go off at 7:03 for my dinner. So I'm going to have to just run over and turn that off. But
I can go. Should I do window and then I can get it ready like this?
Sure. You want?
Sort of ready.
Perfect. Looks good.
And I can still see you now. I guess because I did a window, not full screen.
Yeah, that's what Sam was saying something about them. Like, I know there's a way you can do this and still see us, so that's good.
Way better because I can see it now, right?
Yeah, that's perfect.
Show, slideshow. Yeah, I think you can see it. You don't see all the boxes on the side, right?
I do. I think you'd have to click present.
Start from the there. Is that okay?
Oops, I just found out that, oh yeah, that's perfect. Tessa was being in the lobby. I didn't realize. So I just accepted her.
So for some reason, I'm full screen, but oh well, you'll just tell me what's going on.
Yeah, no, it's fine. Sorry, I did not realize you were in the lobby. They changed how that works, Tessa. So we do have people joining right now, so I'm going to let them in.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Can you hear us?
You can. Sorry, I have to switch to my laptop. My desktop just like wouldn't connect to the camera, so that's why it's on and off.
That's okay. Sweet. So I'll let everyone do a quick intro, pass the mic over to you, Nancy, and then get going.
Sounds good.
All right, here we go. Hello, everyone. Good evening.
Haley, we just finished our coach ed 30 seconds ago, so
perfect.
If we maybe give 2 minutes for that, then switch over to this one. So.
No problem. My oven timer is about to go off, so I'm going to go turn that off, and then I'll be back in 30 seconds.
Awesome. Hi, Nancy.
Hi, Ryan. How are you? I feel bad I can't see you because I don't know how to shrink the screen with my presentation.
If you go back on the Google, if you want to see people, if you go back on the Google Meets page, on the top, there's a bar, and you'll see that your is your PowerPoint in as Google, or is it just a PowerPoint?
It's just PowerPoint.
Okay. You might just do a double screen then, a split screen.
Okay. I was wondering how I do that. Okay.
Haley's the expert, though. She'll be able to tell you.
There, I think I see it now. So you can still see there. Good. Good. That's better. I felt bad I couldn't see people, and technical stuff for me.
Okay, I'll introduce Nancy and Tessa now while we're waiting a couple more minutes for people to join. So Nancy will be our first presenter tonight. She's a registered physiotherapist with Olmsted Physiotherapy. Did I get that right, Nancy? Sweet. And she'll be talking about common injuries in canoe and kayak today. And then Tessa will follow afterwards. Tessa will be talking about how to make a winning team in C15, and Tessa is co-owner of Nello Canada.
Great.
Sweet. I think 7:03 is a fair enough time for us to get started. If you would like,
Sure.
Nancy, pass it over to
Sure.
you.
Thanks, Haley, for those introductions. I just wanted to talk a little bit about common injuries in the canoe and kayak sprint racing teams. So here goes with my little PowerPoint presentation. And let's just see if I can get going here. So just a little bit of background about me, not too much, but I was a longtime national team member many years ago, and I was an Olympic athlete in both the 84 and 88 games. My first international race was in Mexico at age 12. So I was pretty young, and I was with Mark Holmes and Bill Trailing and a few of the household names that we all remember. And I was fortunate to be able to go to many world championships. One of my best ones was a third place at the World University Games with my sister. So that's a little bit of a background. I'm also an avid Nordic skier and really enjoy that. So right now as a physio, I'm trying to give back to the sport that gave me so much. So that's really what I wanted to talk about. And just here's the outline. And feel free, I think Haley's going to be monitoring questions. I think you can do it via text, or feel free to go off mic and ask me. I'm happy to answer it, or at the end, I've given you my contact information. So lots of information tonight. Hopefully I can do it pretty quickly and efficiently. We want to go over the typical injuries, the common causes of the injuries, what the mechanism of injury, which is similar to the causes, and what type of treatment options you can seek out in your area, and what prevention or practical applications that you can use yourself just to help prevent injuries. So I'm going to break it down into kayaking first, and then canoeing, and then a little bit of gender differences, a little bit about para athletes, just to give a really well-rounded synopsis. I love this picture. This is the New Zealand girl, and I have forgotten her name. It's just drawn a blank, but someone might be able to pipe in. Thank you, Lisa. Yes, yes, Carrington, isn't it? Carrington. There we go. Just love her technique, of course. But some of the typical injuries, you look at the rotation, you look at the arm movement, you look at the body. Lots of injuries can occur with kayaking, both men and women, of course. The references are down below, so I'm happy to provide that as well for those, or even the PowerPoint presentation. But we see a lot of shoulder injuries, rotator cuff injuries, bursitis, tendonitis. I'm going to go over those in a little bit more detail further on. Often you see the thoracic region, which is the middle back, and of course the scapular region. And you can see she's got really quite round shoulders, which is the position we tend to use in kayaking. You see the wrist having to do the exit or the recovery. Using your wrist can also cause injuries. Elbow, and of course the lower back, because of all that rotation and the use of the lower extremity, the legs, for power. So we see a lot of that. So what I wanted to do today is just break down the kayak stroke into the 4 parts. And the main thing, of course, we know is kayak is a very symmetrical movement. So you're getting equal development on both sides, which is obviously very important and helps with, less risk of injury. So you look at that, and you look at the recovery, and you think of the exit. You're having to bring your arm into what we call an external rotated position and an abducted position, which is away from your body. You're getting that position, which I always call answering the phone. So it's quite a distinct movement to set the blade up for the catch on the opposite side. So what I often see is the recovery. You have the rotator cuff gets impinged because there's not a lot of space where the humerus or the shoulder meets the clavicle or the acromion area. So you sometimes see impingement of the tendons in that area in the recovery phase of the stroke. With the catch, you often can see when you're kind of stabbing the water, so to speak. You're really jabbing the water. There's a lot of aggressiveness there, where you might see some injuries to the wrists and the elbow because you're having such force going through. So those are the areas you might see the area or the mechanism where the injury might occur. The pulling phase, of course, you're going to do a lot of movement with your legs, which are the bigger muscles, and of course the core strength, which is a key component, and the rotation, which includes the mid back and the lower back. So in the pulling phase, that's where you might see where those injuries might occur or develop. And the exit is sort of the same thing, not quite the same as recovery, but you're exiting, you're having to pull away from the boat a little bit. So you're working a lot of the core and the extrinsic muscles of the shoulder. So those are part of the phases of the kayak where you might identify limitations or weaknesses that could inevitably cause an injury. So I picked a spattering of pictures, which I really liked, of course, on the web. And we look at Sophie Jensen on the top left, and you look at that wonderful A-frame and the position, you see all that hip movement and rotation. So you can see the right shoulder for Sophie would be susceptible to injury because she's above 90 degrees and it can cause that impingement. Then you look below and you see Lawrence Vincent Lapointe, and you see that exit that I was talking about. You've got that movement. So with canoeing, you've got the steering action and the mechanism of putting a lot of wrist and arm to steer the boat. So there's more susceptibility to injury in that area. Then you look at Marc De Jong, which I always love this picture of him, the 200-meter superstar. You see the positioning of his arm and the rotation, where you can see there could be some mid-back injuries that could occur, as well as the shoulders. And obviously the picture from the front view, you can see that exit. So I hope that pictures of the form and the technique really solidify where the parts of the stroke could cause injury. So I've just talked a little bit about the kayak. Now we want to look a little bit at the canoeing injuries. Very similar, of course, but we look at there's a little bit more susceptibility to hip injuries because of the overstretch of the psoas muscle of the hip and the hip flexor, as well as the quadricep muscle, particularly the rectus femoris that covers two joints or crosses two joints. The other big thing, of course, with canoeing is it's asymmetrical or one-sided. So athletes will have a tendency to overdevelop on the one side, which creates muscle imbalances. And that's something that we really, or your coaches hopefully are really working on the off season, even partly during the season, to try and maintain as much muscle symmetry as possible. So breaking down the canoe stroke, similar that we talked about the exit with that action of the wrist and the elbow and the shoulder, which goes into internal rotation and abduction, and with the recovery, and then the entry is still that aggressive positioning. You have to watch the top shoulder because of you're at about 140 degrees of abduction and flexion. So that's where you can see some injuries to the shoulder. And you think of that propulsion, which is that hip drive and the reach and the rotation, where you can see some injuries that can occur. So if we look at back to the kayak, the main areas of injuries, you can see contusions, which are bruising. All it means is there's that inflammation at the site of the injury. That's the most common. Sprains and strains. So sprain is where you have an involvement of a ligament, where you can have a ligament injury. The shoulder is a very, very mobile joint, but what you gain in that mobility of a shoulder, you lose in stability. So it relies on the ligaments and the small muscles called the rotator cuff. You also may endure subluxations, which is like the shoulder moving a little bit out of place because you have some laxity or looseness of those ligaments. Tendonitis, anything with itis on the end means inflammation. So very common to have a rotator cuff muscle injury. And then, of course, I'm sure all the kayakers have had a few abrasions and, on the butt or even on the hands, you're hitting the edge of the boat. So various injuries can occur that way. And the references are there. So when we break it down and we look at these common causes for both canoe and kayak, they are very similar. The picture I really like is the bottom right. And you see the arrow, you could see that's the head of the humerus, or it looks like it's a fist. That's what it looks like. And then if you put your hand over top, that's the part of the clavicle, and which is called the acromion area, the spine of the scapula and the clavicle. And there's not a lot of space there. You can see where the red is. So if you start lifting your shoulder up over 90 degrees, you're going to continually impinge that area that might be inflamed. So that's really important to see that. And it can become chronic. So you have to really take care and prepare yourself well in the off season, and also train smart in during the season, not overdoing it. Rest and work ratio needs to be really monitored by your coach, and then watching you and making sure you're not overtraining. So that's really important. Just as I mentioned down below, it can lead to chronic problems. Sometimes GI problems. I just thought I'd throw that in because sometimes if you are drinking too much water or you're eating too much and then you try to do all that rotation, it's going to impact the abdominal region, where you might have gas, or you might have, even endure diarrhea because of that excessive rotation in the middle of the core. So that's some little things to think about. Hope I've given you a real overview of what can happen. I'm going to get into a bit more detail. I did want to mention a little bit between men and women. There's not a huge difference. I think we all know that men have more muscle bulk. They're stronger. And so they will be more susceptible to injury because of the increased propulsion, the increased force, and that they can generate. So they are more likely to sustain an injury than women. It's hard to really state that, but this article did provide that. Still, the same regions for both men and women are shoulder and the mid-back because of the rotation. I think the women tend to have a little bit more of overuse-related injuries because they have a smaller frame than a man. So those are just some small little things to consider. We also want to look at age group differences. I don't want to get into too much detail because that could be a whole other presentation, because during your youth and your adolescence, you're growing, you're changing, and it's you're very susceptible to injury because you don't have the same strength ratio, you don't have the same stability. And if you think of any of your athletes from the start of the summer to the end of the summer, they've grown a foot and now they're taller than you, which is happening at our little club. And so sometimes that can make a difference where the muscles are tight and they can't catch up to the bone growth. And it's quite common in young boys to have the hamstrings in particular are super tight, and that can negatively impact your performance. So obviously flexibility is another factor. Other thing for coaches to consider too is adolescents and youth. They are prone to injury partly because of perhaps improper technique and inexperience. They can be vulnerable to injury. So it's so important for the coaches to develop good technique with the younger kids at that younger age, to help prevent injuries now and in the future. So those are key things to consider, growth and development. But there's lots more I can delve into on that, but I'm not going to, but just to give you a little taste of that. So the other thought I should bring up is I thought it would be important to bring up para-athletes because they're an important and integral part of our canoe kayak Ontario. And it's almost self-explanatory, but you think of if you have one that's a deficit, such as CIL, Scarf has a right lower leg amputation. So they wouldn't have as much power on the footrest, which means they're relying on the left leg as well as their upper body. So non-ambulatory is how they identified that in the report or the research. They would be more susceptible to shoulder injuries. So it's really important to help prevent that, because they do have a higher prevalence of injuries in that area. So you have to look at, if it's an amputation, we want to get the muscles balanced in the shoulders. Just as important in able-bodied athletes as well, but still even more important to keep the symmetry as much as possible with a para-athlete. And just the biomechanic component that I've mentioned below, their biomechanics will be different because of their amputation. So we have to look at that, and maybe more video analysis for these athletes would be really helpful for coach to athlete, to help them and make sure the strengthening and stretching and techniques is ideal. So just a few things we talked at the beginning on how the format of this would be. Mechanisms and causes of injury, as we mentioned, would be improper technique, some things that we can overcome, some inexperience, which you can work on and with your coach easily. Not so easily, it's a hard sport, but also on water training. I didn't really want to bring myself up, but I was at the point later on in my career where I did overtrain, because I was trying to do the same volume as the younger athletes. And I didn't need to do that much training because I had such a proper base. I should have known better, but also it was a coach and an athlete that need to work together. So really listen to your coach, listen to your body. It might be as simple as taking your heart rate in the morning, and it might be spiked, or you might not feel great, and you go on a scale of 0 to 10 on how you're feeling. But the coach can pretty much intuitively see if you're tired. It's, your performance on the water. We talked a few slides before that about that flexibility deficits, which is during a growth spurt, they won't have that same flexibility, and that will definitely impact the biomechanics in the water. We talked a little bit about muscle imbalances, which is more prevalent in canoers. So it's really important to work on balance training and balancing out the muscles, working on that posture, so there's, minimizing the deficiencies. So those are some really key things that you can work on and you can improve. This slide is my favorite, of course, because it's more technical, but you look at these pictures and you see on the left side, that's the arrow says subacromial space. There is not much space. So if there's any inflammation of that tendon or the bursa, then it will keep getting pinched. And paddling or kayaking, canoeing is a repetitive motion. It will keep getting pinched. So that's important, particularly in the early season and also mid-season, watching the volume. So same with the picture to the middle, where it says internally rotated. So you see this picture, her shoulders are rounded forward, which means they're internally rotated. So any paddler, they've got this round back and it's really strong this way, but we really have to work on trying to minimize that roundedness, because it causes, if everyone can try now, if you squeeze your shoulder blades together towards your spine, lift your arm over your head. So everyone try that with one arm or two. Okay, now we're going to roll our shoulders forward, really round, and make bad posture. Now try to lift your arms. I hope everyone felt the difference when your shoulder blades were together towards the spine. Add more shoulder movement. So that's what's important, is the muscles in between the shoulder blades and behind the shoulder blades need to be strong to keep that shoulder blade from tipping forward excessively. Hopefully that makes sense. So I don't think I better go into too much, but it's really important to know the positioning of what we call the shoulder, or the GH, or glenohumeral joint. That was pretty detailed, so hopefully it wasn't too much for you guys. So back injuries are common as well. We know that lower back, you're putting a lot of strain on it with the leaning forward, both in canoeing and kayaking. So you're putting a lot of tension on the extensor muscles. You're leaning a bit forward. So if you have that poor posture or overusing those muscles, it can lead, of course, to the inflammatory process, maybe a muscle imbalance or a herniated disc. And all those can impact your balance in the kayak or the canoe. It can minimize the amount of strength you can put on the blade during the propulsion phase. So all those are really important to try and avoid that. So strengthening in off season, doing the squats and the lunges and the, two arm rows and all those kinds of things. The back extensions are all helpful. Now the thoracic injuries, I've given you an example later on, but we're looking at this. You have rib stress fractures, if you can believe it, because of that repetitive strain and the repetitive overloading. And that can often be posturally related. Now, this picture is kind of confusing, but if you look at the picture, see the yellow are nerves. So that's super important. I don't know, and I can't see anyone because it's the full screen, but I don't know if any people get numbness in their hands or numbness down their arm. Well, sometimes that can be those nerves that you see in yellow are getting impinged because of either muscle tightness or that movement over your shoulders. So be mindful. That's why we stretch, because we want to keep that chest open to help reduce that pinching or nerve weakness. So the other area is forearm and the elbows, and we know that from the repetitive movements of the canoe stroke with all the steering action, the kayak with setting up the blade so it's going to enter the water in the right position to get the maximum propulsion and strength. So you can be susceptible to repetitive strain or an elbow tendonitis. The picture on the left, you see the white is the tendon. And it's important to know a tendon is what attaches a muscle to a bone. You see it's white, which means it doesn't have a great blood supply. So hence why it takes longer to heal a tendonitis than a muscle. So that's why sometimes elbow problems can be really detrimental to your paddling. Same as the wrist injuries, you've got all the movement with your blade and the changing the angle for both canoeing and kayaking. So you do want to strengthen. I know coach in North Bay, Mihail, has us doing a movement with rolling up a rope with a weight on it, and it's rotating, so it helps those wrist and forearm muscles, which is really important. So it's a great exercise to do. So we see those injuries. I'm sure some of you can attest to some of the injuries you've had. So physio, of course, is what I am and what I do, and I do think it is beneficial, particularly if you catch it early and you do all the right things. Chiropractic treatment could be helpful as well, sometimes massage or doing maintenance. So physio, think about it. I'm sure each club member, each club, the coaches have you do a proper warm-up, whether it's a light jog down the street and back, doing the flexibility, which is static, which means no movement, and dynamic, which means movement. So you want to do a combination of both before you get on the water. The other thing that will help is the prevention is strength muscles, the small ones, which is the rotator cuff muscles. There's 4 little guys, and all you strong out there guys and gals, rotator cuff muscles, you need to strengthen them with 5 pounds or less, or you're going to be using deltoid muscles. So you really have to use small weight or TheraBand to help your rotator cuff. And you want to do opposing muscles, so opposites. Super important. In terms of training, I know I have a real problem with GA1 because I just I don't have that gear. I find it really boring, but it's so super important because you're working on technique, which we talked about is important for preventing injuries, improper technique, but it's also used for recovery. So whether you're doing pause paddling or keeping the stroke rate under 80, what have you, whether you're doing boats, it's important to get that balance between hard training and then that GA1 rest. All know equipment, getting good equipment is important. Buying the right paddle, whether it's a Bracha 4, Bracha 2, whatever you're capable of doing. The other comment I wanted to mention, when I bought my paddle, it was important for me to not have a shaft that was too stiff because it would be too hard on my shoulders that are old and injured. So I was very careful to not get the maximum stiffness for my paddle. But I'm a master's level athlete now. Maybe when I was younger, I'd probably tolerate that. But that's something it's important to think about with your coach and talk to them. The other thing that I don't think any athletes are always good at stretching after the workout. I know we aren't as much, but doing a stretch can really, really help. Just watching TV, pretending to do your schoolwork, you can do your stretches. So I find that a good excuse to get out of something that I want to do. So make sure you do your stretches 15 to 20 minutes. The other thing to remember, I'm sure I have a multitude of age groups here in this call. Remember when you have that aging process, you've got puberty, you've got growth spurts, you've got hormones, you've got coordination factors, and you're growing into your body. So don't be too hard on yourself. That's often things that you have to just let time take its course and get through that. So a couple more things. I think we're doing pretty well on time. I'm going to try and speed it up a little bit. Flexibility, you can see the muscle groups that I've listed here. Obviously, the hip flexors and the IT band is the outside of your leg are really important to stretch. And the pecs, which are your chest muscles, because we don't want to be sitting like this all the time. We want to be getting yourself open. Strength. I think the core is almost one of the most important things you could do, which includes your lower back muscles, because it's the tennis muscles. You need to get those strong. And it's absolutely critical that everyone does rotator cuff and serratus anterior muscles. I've got a picture at the end of this presentation, but those are really, really important, and they're often weak. So a couple of examples of strengthening. You can see they're using TheraBand in the front, the side, doing resistance bands, and they may be boring when you want to do your maximum weights, but they're still really important to add to your training program. This is a couple of samples, and I'm happy to help your coaches or you guys with this. It's super important to do this strengthening exercise because it'll really help keep that shoulder in an optimal position so it's not rotated forward. So those exercises are really important to do every weight training practice. We've got a few more here. Obviously, stretches on the top and stretching out your lats where the lady has her leg back. You've got sort of a bent over row or squats or another thing that are very important. And the picture on the far right, I have to tell you, this was really hard for me because I have a balance problem on the left, and it made a world of difference. I think you call them airplanes. I call them airplanes, but I just love them. They're really hard, but they're so great because you're doing a squat, and it's balance, it's coordination, and it's strength of the core. So there's lots of ideas and lots more exercises you can do, but this is just a sampling. And there's a few more you can see. The picture on the back, on the bottom of the story, you can see she's pinching those shoulder blades together towards the spine. So it's super important to do those exercises and making sure you maintain that good position, good posture while you're doing it. And these are good for both canoeing and kayaking because there's a lot of parallels there. So lots of stretches. I really like these ones too. They're with the stretching, the thoracic spine rotations, or on all fours, and you're working on balance. And the one on the far right, it works a muscle called the quadratus lumborum, which is in your lower back, and a bit of your piriformis, which is in the buttock. Those are really important and important for canoers for sure too. So just a couple of ideas. Obviously, physiotherapy is my field, and there's lots of things. I'm a very manual physiotherapist, so I do a lot of hands-on, trigger points, glides, slides, movements of a joint to help heal it. And then we can use what we call local modalities, which helps reduce inflammation, helps reduce pain. Is generally when you have an injury, you have pain, you have restricted range of motion, you have strength deficits, and then functionally, you might not be able to do the paddling to the same volume, or you might have to take time off completely. So let's try to avoid things, be smart when we train. So lastly, I did reach out on Facebook, which is probably archaic for you guys, but I did reach out and reached a couple of athletes. But Courtney's gave me some great information. Picture, I love this picture of her and the team. But she said she had, it's called a thoracic outlet. And what that means, remember when I showed you the picture of the yellow nerves? She was getting that impinged. So all that muscle development in the neck and shoulders, she's getting neurological weakness. And we obviously don't want that. So she was doing kinesiotaping and stretching and strengthening. And she takes some time off training. And but it took 3 months to heal. So that's a big time, length of time to be off training, especially at this high level. She's also had lower back spasms where your muscles just go into contraction and they can't relax. So she had to take some medications, time off work, heating. So that's really important as well. She also endured bursitis, and that I forgot to. A tendon is what attaches a bone to a bone, and a bursa is a fluid-filled sac that helps prevent that tendon from rubbing on a bony prominence, something that's sticking out a bit. So that's what a bursa is, and there's one in the shoulder that gets pinched. She had that several times per year, so she managed it pretty well with some rest. Look at what she did for prevention, guys. That was super important. She did daily yoga or mobility stretching for 20 minutes every day. And she maintained a maintenance program with a physio, which is a fantastic idea if you've got the funds or you have some private coverage. So that's pretty cool what he was able to give us. So thank you, Courtney, for that. I did reach out to a couple other athletes. Max is one of, he's from North Bay and has had a career in both Carl and North Bay. And he gave me some great information, which I really liked. He said he's had numerous shoulder impingement conditions. And he said the onset was steering in harsh conditions, so wavy conditions. So thought that was pretty important. So his suggestion, of course, will avoid speed work in really windy conditions, which is obvious. Eric Weston was a local kayak paddler, very tall gentleman from Richmond Hill, and got to the Ontario level and won at the Indigenous Games in K1. So he found a lot of back spasms, probably because he's tall, and shoulders often felt pretty strained. And Dan Huff is one of our former alma maters from North Bay, and he had spasms all the time, wave actions, bad balance, and had a good sense of humor about that. And he said he takes lots of Advil. And finally, Katie Vincent, I was surprised she got back to me and she said she hasn't had any canoeing injuries. So let's all touch wood for her. That's absolutely fantastic. So she's doing something right, but she did recently have some broken bones, but I think she was cycling into Toronto. So very good comments from fellow athletes, which I'm sure you all have comments to pipe on your injuries. Finally, I just really wanted to thank you for your time and attention. I hope it wasn't too boring, but I left my email there. And just the last takeaway message is train smart, maintain good technique, good flexibility, strengthen those core muscles, work with small weights to do those rotator cuff try to minimize the imbalances, and pretty much that's it. And that's an old picture of my sister and I from 1984.
Awesome. Thank you, Nancy. There's no questions in the chat, but if anyone has any questions for Nancy, now would be a great time. You can come off mute or put them in the chat. Ryan has a question.
Ooh.
Ryan, would you like to come off mute?
Yeah, I do have a question, but I'll just wait and see if there's others. If not,
cool. Go ahead.
Okay, Nancy. So thank you. This is I feel like this is a whole year university or college course in 40 minutes. So thank you so much. This is incredible. I had a couple questions. So Nancy was with us at our Welland camp, and it was incredible how quickly you got the paddlers back on the water, where I thought there was going to be a lot of injuries. There wasn't, that you were able to get them back on the water. So how does a coach, because we have lots of coaches on the call, how do they determine and what should they do to get athletes back in the water, or that they need to go see professional treatment? Like, what would be good advice for you on that?
So you probably check, number one, their pain levels. So we do a pain rating scale. You could just go 0 to 10, and if it's like a 7, 8, or 9, I'd be backing off, right? If it's a 1, 2, 3, maybe 4, I'd probably still get them out on the water. And then I would also look at like, you can easily check range of motion. All the coaches know you can do flexion or abduction and see if there's limitations. So if I've got 90 degrees, but you need, so if they're maybe in this area and they're still okay, or range of motion, and you can identify where the pain is, you can touch. Well, we have to be careful as coaches, but you ask permission. Can I touch? Can you show me where the pain is? I do that as a physio, so it's easy for me to get consent. So you would have to be careful. But, if there's a shoulder injury, where is it? So pain, range of motion, and then you could check strength, or you could see what intensity causes it. So is it just, if it's GA1 and they're having pain all the time, or if it's only at E1 or something like that, you could probably identify that. The other idea I had would be, when in the training does it occur? So often you'll know it's a tendonitis. You start to have some pain at the beginning of the workout, and then it goes away. So it's more of a repetitive strain, and it goes away. So they'd be best to ice it, put some Promeal or some creams on it and stuff like that. So, but you call me, I'm good with that.
Thank you. I did have one more question. I don't want to take over this, but super interesting. Thank you, Nancy. I know you mentioned in terms of just, you can ask them how they're feeling, their scale. Is that what you would suggest for the coaches on the call? Like, how do you monitor health, I guess? What would be great ways to do that?
Yeah. I would monitor. So it's often happens in winter as well when they weight. So it's bench press is often, you can see that you're getting into that maximal weight where you see they're starting to have problems. Sometimes it can be in rough water when they're in a crew boat. So how would I monitor? I would still I would ask them their pain level. Can they continue to paddle? Is it going away with stretching? So you get coaches to get them to stop and stretch. Maybe they get out of the boat, maybe in the motorboat, and they do a few stretches, or see if they can balance and do it, or they get on the dock and then see if it goes away. That's probably what I would do, and see if it goes away, and then monitor. But these coaches will know an athlete that, look at, hi, sorry. So the coaches know when athletes struggling or having a problem. The other time where you might see injuries occur is early season down in Florida. So maybe the injuries healed faster in Welland because they were partway into their on Pacific sport training. But you walk when you start. That they can really get injured in Florida. And also when you're doing that cycle of, so let's say you're doing a 3-week cycle of really high intensity, you're building up, and then the 4th week you're easing off. That 3rd week is where you might be really mindful of injuries. So the only thing I want to mention too, I don't know, probably because we have a younger group in North Bay, but when we trained, we did a lot more volume. 25 years ago versus now it seems to be less volume quality. So I'm not sure if that's helping reduce the number of injuries or whether it's because we're with a younger group. Like we don't have U23s in North Bay, so I have no idea if the volume would be higher. So.
Andrea asked a question in the chat if you have any good resources to use for taping techniques.
Yeah, I sure can. I'll find them for sure. I usually follow the direction of the muscle. I sometimes make up positions. The one thing you want to watch is if you don't want to tape the upper traps because it inhibits the traps, and then they're going to rely on the small muscles. So I try not to tape upper traps, especially if the shoulder blades are tipped forward anteriorly.
Cool. Andrea? She just raised her hand.
It is fun. I love questions.
Sorry, that was a mistake, but thank you for answering my question.
Thanks, Andrea.
Email me, then I'll remember to give it to you. Just I need a reminder.
That's great. Thanks.
Okay.
Anything else, team? Anyone else? All right. Well, thank you again, Nancy. That was amazing.